Hey guys, welcome to this new episode of TD, C#, Godot. So previously we created the beginning of a health system for the enemies, and in this episode we will take it a little bit further by actually creating a way to damage the enemy and have their health decrease and eventually have the enemy die. So let's start right away by going in our enemy 2D scene and opening the enemy 2D script. So far we have created a way to display the health and a way to check if the health is inferior or equal to 0 and queue free the enemy to make it die. In order to start the implementation of the damaging of the enemy, I will actually create a public function which I'm going to call damage. So the point of this function is to be called, summoned by other entities in the game, namely a tower or a spell or anything basically that should decrease the health of the enemy here. Since we will be wanting to decrease the health of the enemy, it is crucial to know the amount of health we're going to chunk down. So we're going to add an argument to this function, which is going to be the argument damage. The simple way to implement this is to just have the current health of the enemy to be reduced by the amount A damage. Then, when we have updated the health, there are two things we want to do. Number one is we want to check for the health of the enemy, like should we have the enemy die? And second thing, update the label, right? So the health changed, so we want the player to be able to see it. Since last time we created this check health method, we're going to use it but kind of expand it. So I'm going to rename it check health and update label. So here basically I wanted to make sure that it does update the health label if the enemy doesn't die. So the behavior is basically going to be based on two situations. If the health is inferior or equal to 0, we will want to have the enemy die, otherwise we just want to update the label. So here let's actually take care of the else part of this. So if the health is still positive, we just want to update the health label. However, if the health is negative, there's something we want to do, and that's bringing the health back to 0 by saying that we want current health to be equal to 0. The point for this is that here we're just like, freeing the node when the enemy should die, but in a game situation we might think that we want to implement a death animation. It will have a little delay here. So the health label could be displayed slightly longer after the enemy actually dies, which means that if the health is -12, you don't really want to display -12, you want to display 0. So the point here is that you want to bring the health back to 0 and update the label so that it does match 0. Of course, we want to make sure that when we damage the enemy, we check health and we update label every time we do damage. So we do have a function here which did not exist anymore, so we're going to remove that. So we could be testing this method as usual by having it being called in a ready function or something like this, but instead we will do something a little bit different and we will start introducing other entities in the game. In the world 2D, I will add a button in there which will act as an intermediate until we have towers to actually deal damage, and this will be a other kind of entity that can do damage to enemies. So this button, I will make it look a little bit better by giving some 320 80 pixels on the custom minimum size in the layout. And I will add a text which is damage an enemy, something like this. And I will also move it around the bottom right corner of the camera. That will be cool. So the primary function of buttons in Godot is to catch player inputs, more specifically player pressing the button. There is a signal or an event which is managed by this button, and the way an event or a signal works is that it has basically two connections, an emitter and a receiver. Since Godot doesn't come in with empty hands, the button is already, I want to say, half coded, half built, so that when you actually add it to your project, you don't really have to take care of the emitter part of the button. What you have to do is just to connect it to a receiver that will be doing whatever you want it to do. So you can go check your node tab, right, of the inspector. And here you will see all the signals that your button can use. So some are actually, I want to say, player input driven, while others are just Godot driven. So the node being added to the scene tree, for example, it's kind of a Godot system thing. But the press signal is just here to catch an input. So this is exactly what we'll want to be using. So anyway, let's actually rename this a debug button 01 here, which will allow us to add a script with a proper name. Debug button 01 is going to be perfect. As I said, the emitter part of the signal is already built in Godot, so we don't have to take care of this. What we have to do is to create a receiving point. Basically, the receiving point is what we call a callable, or you might understand this as a function or method. So we're going to create a function here, which is going to be a void unpressed function. So do understand that the name of the function doesn't matter at all. It's just that since we're going to use the pressed signal, well, I'm going to name this method unpressed. So here we have manually created receiver in order to connect the emitter and the receiver. It's just a question of being able to have a script which knows both those objects and then use an operator to bind them. So here we're going to override the ready function so that we can do this connection when the button's added to the scene tree. So the emitter, which is the press signal, that's part of the button. So we already have this accessible. And then we do use the plus equal operator to basically bind the receiver, which is going to be the unpressed callable. And that's pretty much it. So C# has a very cool syntax for this. Just note that since we are actually referring to a function and not invoking or triggering or using a function, we're not going to use the parenthesis, which is, triggering the code inside. That's not what we're doing. We're just saying that we connect the code to the signal. So now that it is actually bound, we just need to add the code here. So the code is going to be having an enemy being damaged. So technically, for the first part here, let's just say that we're going to create a variable, which is going to be an export variable, which is going to be an enemy 2D. And this is going to be the enemy 2D, just the enemy actually, it's very fine like this. And unpressed, we're just going to have enemy and use the damage function we have created and send the value 5. Okay, so let's go back to Godot, save everything, and build our project. Now the debug button can receive an enemy, so let's throw the first one, make sure it has some health here. It has 10, let's give 25. The second one's gonna have 20, and the third one 15, that's correct. All right, let's try to run this. So when we do click on the button, we do see that the enemy is being damaged, except that if we keep going, we have an error because, well, the object is gone and we technically don't have the object anymore. So I still don't know what I'm going to do after this because I've been thinking about a few debug buttons which could be quite interesting, like a button that damages all the enemies on the map, or a button that damages a random enemy on the map. Except that while those are interesting things to do to practice, they're not really necessary to actually progress toward the actual tower defense game. So if you actually want to see those questions being answered and see how we can do that, because it's actually quite interesting, tell me in the comments or in Discord somewhere so that I do add those in videos. But until then, I will probably focus more on the TD aspect of the series because so far we only have the enemies. So that's all I will be sharing in this episode. Yeah, kind of short, no exercise, because yeah, the next thing we will be dealing with is instantiating an enemy, like clicking on a button to create an enemy, and this can get a little bit, I mean, this can be quite a lot, so we're gonna start on a fresh video for this one. So I do hope you liked this short episode. If you did, think about doing the usual stuff, liking, subscribing, eventually commenting. And if you want to help the channel, you can think about becoming a member. It's very cheap and it helps me funding the production of the videos. Anyway, as usual, if you want to reach me, you do have the comments or the Discord, and I will see you in the next video.